John and Gage were paramedics here at Station 51, and terror had hit the city. Not only were there fires, regular emergencies, car accidents more than usual because people had been ordered to evacuate, but the smoke was searing the eyes of the residents as they could see the fires that were engulfing the very county that they had made their home. Now, Station 51 was not exempt from what was going on. They knew all the horrors and had seen first place what had happened. It goes without saying that Roy and John were going to have a very busy week. They were paramedics at Station 51, and here they were going to try to save as many lives as possible. Because of the immense emergency and the fires that surrounded and engulfed the very lives of the people that they loved and cared for, they were now on 24-hour watch. And with the help of their friends at the many hospitals, particularly the Rampart Hospital, they were going to do the best they could to save the people who were in absolute danger. Meanwhile, at Rampart, the people were inundated with hundreds and hundreds of people who had been either trapped, burned, were having heart attacks as a result of trying to get out of their homes, their automobile accidents. If there was an emergency, that is where they were sent to. And Kelly Brackett, as the chief of emergency services, knew that this was going to be a horrible day. At his side stood Julie McCall. She was the chief nurse, one of the best in the business. In fact, he thought the best in the business. She was so lucky. And his good friend, Joe Early, who was the medical doctor who ran everything. It was just a whole entire mess, and the city was literally in extreme danger. Even in the hospital, the danger was evident. So, as the day unfolded, John and Roy found themselves at the outskirts of one of the many blazes that were not under full control. This meant that they were in extreme danger and that at any time they could find themselves in need of medical assistance. But here they were to help out the people of his dear city. Just as they sat down in their truck and to have themselves a needed cup of coffee, the warning buzzer went off. A man has suffered a fall as he was trying to control the brush fire that was engulfing the area. He had fallen down a cliff of about 60 feet, was still alive as they could see he was moving, but the fire was coming very close to where he was. And even though his friends were doing their best to control the situation was dire. With no hesitation, both Roy and John jumped out of the truck, grabbed their equipment, and began the long climb down this embankment. It was very dangerous and was slippery from all the drops of the chemicals to try to put the fire out. As they climbed down, carrying a gurney and all their equipment, and back in the 1970s, the telephone that they needed to connect with the hospital was not a nice piece of equipment either. So as they climbed down, they were not only carrying themselves, their equipment, a phone, a stretcher, they were going to have to try to climb this steep ravine with a dead weight of a fallen firefighter. As they approached the man, they found that he was in very bad condition, with a respiration of under 7, a heartbeat that was slow and labored, and barely conscious. The first thing they needed to do was contact Rampart. As soon as they ran their buzzer, Kelly Brackett came immediately to the phone and listened intently as they described the man who had just fallen a great distance. He explained to them, gave them the information of giving him an IV, starting him on oxygen, and making sure that everything was done to protect him from having any type of spinal injury. And that collar was put on him. They placed him very carefully on the stretcher, tied him in as tightly as they could, and began the long stretch up to where they could get an ambulance to transport this man to the hospital. Now, he was actually quite a heavy man of about 170 pounds, and it was very slippery. So at the top was Chief Kelly, and he was explaining to each one how they would have to hoist this man with the help of Roy and John and do their best to make the trip up to the top of the ledge. It was a slow and treacherous walk, but as they climbed and continued slipping, with strong arms, the friends and people of the squad and the station managed to get the man, Roy, and John up to the top safely. Just as they went to get to the ambulance, which was waiting, the man went into cardiac arrest. Now, this is the worst thing that can happen. You can lose many people through cardiac arrest. And they began immediate CPR and contacted Rampart immediately, where the chief surgeon, Kelly Brackett, was waiting intently at the door. He told them what to give them for medication, and with this, with the zap of the defibrillator, they waited. They checked for signs of life. There was none. They again depressed and no heartbeat. With that, they were instructed to continue CPR and they headed to the hospital. Now, the hospital was normally only about 7 minutes away, but there were 10,000 people trying to evacuate out of the city, and at their best, they were not going to be able to make it in. Finally, some 10 minutes later, they arrived at the ER where the man still had no heartbeat, no pulse, and even though he had been receiving CPR and oxygen the entire time, his condition was dire. He was brought immediately into the ER where he was worked on by Dixie McCall and Bobby Troop. Unfortunately, to the dismay of everybody, the firefighter, John Siemens, had not made it. But it was their job, and they had to go back. There were so many others that they might be able to save that John and Roy grabbed their supplies and headed back out to the horrific fires. Just as they pulled out of the ER, another call came in. This time, it was a man just locally who was, as he was attempting to leave his home, had fallen down this walk in front of his house and had possibly broken his leg or worse. They were not sure. They knew that he was not in good condition. He was 75 years old and he had fallen hard on hard cement in a panic. And with that, off they went. Now, they arrived at the scene only 2 minutes later, followed by a Squad 33. Squad 51 itself was still busy. The fire department was still busy at the fire, but because of the urgency of the call, they had been asked to go to this home. John and Roy got out of their truck, grabbed the medical supplies, and immediately came over to the man. The man was in absolute distress with the blood pressure that measured over 200 and needed immediate medication to bring that down and get him out of his stressful situation. It was confirmed by both Roy and John that it was most likely that he had broken his leg, but it was not a truly life-threatening situation as long as they could get his blood pressure under control. So they reached for their phone and contacted Rampart once more, where they were answered by Dixie. Dixie said to hold on, and they would immediately send Dr. Brackett over to the phone. He came over immediately, and with the urgency of the high blood pressure and the man having had a heart attack once before, he immediately told them to give him the medicine and to make the leg straight and make him as comfortable as possible. Bring him to the ER. With that, they put him in a plastic case. His leg was made level, and they put him in the ambulance. Fortunately, at this time, the medication had started to take effect, and his blood pressure had gone down to below 180. Although that was a very dangerous reading, it was getting better. With that, they headed to the hospital. There in the hospital, they were met with more chaos, for another 30 people had been sent there as a place of safety, and there just wasn't any room left. Eva, one of the ER nurses, was doing her best to take care of all these people, many who didn't speak English, and explain to them where they needed to go, where they could sit. Some had their pets, some had children, some were older. It was a fiasco. She ran and got John and Roy, and with the help of the two men helping carry many of the things, they did their second job of helping the people of the city, the people that they loved. With that, they came in, checked with their friend Dixie, who told them that the man was going to be okay, that his problem was he was so upset and in so much pain that he just needed to calm down, and the medication was working, and he would probably be going to wherever they were going to be sending him within the next day. It was a total fiasco. They had never seen such horrors, and they were off to go and help their very company who was in danger and helping the other people of their city. As John and Roy headed out to the original place of the fire, they could see that it was not contained at all, that it was still spreading, and their own friends and other members of Squad 51, Fire Station 51, had to back up almost 2 miles from their original spot. There, Chief Kelly was on the bullhorn, and he was announcing where people needed to go. Marco Lopez, who was a firefighter for Engine 51, was busy helping injured firefighters. Some were minor. They were having problems with their breathing. Some were doing not so well, and those were the ones that Roy and John went immediately to work with. Now, what had happened is that about 5 minutes before, there had been a collapse of a lot of trees in the area. They had gone down, and with that, the sparks and things had lit many things on fire. More had spread. And in the fiasco, 3 firefighters were now in poor condition. The first man was a friend of theirs who had worked for many years at their engine, but had moved on to another department just 2 weeks ago. He had second-degree burns on his hand and possibly third-degree burns on his arm. That was where John and Roy immediately contacted Rampart, who told them to place a bandage on the man and transport him with saline immediately to the hospital. As they went to grab him and take his blood pressure, his temperature, things were not poor, but they were not good, and he was having a little trouble breathing, so they placed him on oxygen, put him in a gurney, put him in the hospital, and watched the dismay as Engine 33 took them off, because Roy and John still had 2 more firefighters that needed to have immediate looking after. So they, after checking both firefighters, noticing that they had several burns, heat exhaustion, lack of oxygen, they each took each one of their medications, called Rampart, took care of each one of these issues, bandaging some of their burns, putting them on a gurney, giving them oxygen and some medication that would help with the pain. They jumped in the waiting ambulance and headed to Rampart. Luckily, there at Rampart, once again, Julie was waiting along with Dr. Early, who immediately took over. And after several minutes, they were starting to look a little bit better. And John and Roy went to the room where the people were all sitting and see if they could help Eva. Eva was doing better. The people were doing better and seemed to be coordinating a little bit better around there. And with that, they went back to the ER, took their more supplies, jumped in the truck, and were off to another call.